Good evening, everybody. I'm Chris DePernell, and I'm one of the co-hosts of UAP Crossfire, and I want to welcome you to this KGRA special. Just recently, the Wall Street Journal has come out with an article and stated that the UAP theory is really fabricated. It's ours. They shook up the UFO community. They say years ago, the United States Air Force, along with the Pentagon and other parts of the United States government, have deceived you. Your government used the UFO studies and the belief of aliens are really a U.S. government plan to deceive you in order to keep secret special black ops projects and keep them in deep, deep secret. That the encounters people were having are really human made and not from other worlds. That some of the most famous UFO encounters were man made and kept hidden from the public. That people affected by these encounters were brushed off as out of this world nonsense. But does the evidence now say something different? I don't know. But we're going to find out. Is all this man made? I don't know. But we're going to try to find out. To discuss this new information is Air Force retiree John Burroughs and Roswell expert Toby Martinez. Sorry about that, Toby.
That's
Gentlemen,
right.
a bombshell article just came out and it caused a firestorm between debunkers and those who swear by the existence of aliens walking among us. So I want to start with, first of all, thank you both for being here today. It's great to have you both. So I want to start with this, this Wall Street Journal article that the Pentagon's disinformation was fueled by America's UFO mythology. U.S. military fabricated evidence of alien technology allowed rumors to fester to cover up real secret weapons program. A tiny Pentagon office that had spent, I don't know, some kind of money investigating conspiracy theories about secret Washington UFO programs when it uncovered a shocking truth. At least one of those theories, and maybe more, have been fueled by a Pentagon itself. And John, I want to start with you. What did you think of this UFO article?
It did exactly what it was supposed to do. It was dropped at Friday night at 9 p.m. So no mainstream news was going to cover it. It did make Drudge, got on Drudge Saturday, but it started a firestorm. The debunkers, which I can't stand because they're disingenuous. I don't have a problem with the skeptics. It's good to be skeptical. The only time you go from being skeptical to a debunker is when the evidence doesn't support your skepticism, or you're proven wrong. But the thing is that side's waving what do they call it in Chicago? The W flag. So they're running around saying they won. See, there's nothing to see here, folks. Move along. UFOs are dead. Just kind of like what happened with Project Blue Book. They came out with they had their panel, they called witnesses, they did all these reviews, and then they came out with their final report, right?
Mm-hmm.
So nothing to see here, folks, other than the guy that ran the whole thing admitted later that, I kind of got told to go that way. But the point is, then the other side, which I think is just as bad as the skeptics and the debunkers in a lot of ways, because they're so ingrained in one way it has to be. There's no other possibilities. There's nothing to study or understand what this report said in a lot of different factions. Okay, they're totally going batshit crazy the other way. So we got this big fight going on. Meanwhile, the government's sitting back. The people that planted this, as far as wanted this out, are laughing their butts off because they won. Because right now, it's completely dead. It started, 2 weeks ago, Toby, when Lou Elizondo shot himself in the foot.
Boy, did he shoot himself in the foot.
But the bottom line is, it's kind of funny. The Wall Street Journal article actually supports what Lou did. Lou came back and said, I got handed this at the last second. Didn't have a chance to really look at it. But, I was told it was legit, and then I went public with it. And then I turned around and it was wrong. Well, that's kind of what the report said. There's a big cover-up on technology and what UFOs were about, and they were using that as a cover to hide our technology and stuff. So
but John, don't you think Lou was a company man? Some people say Lou was a company man.
Well, he's actually what I call him which will get me in trouble, but it's true. You go back in time about 2 decades ago or less, who was the big guy that was Lou Elizondo at that point? You remember who it was?
Oh yeah,
Chris? Richard
yep.
Doty. Richard Doty
Doty
was what Lou Elizondo is now. Counter intel, out there having people's heads spin. 1 minute he says it's this, 1 minute he says it's that, 1 minute he attacks this. Elizondo is doing the same thing today. But what's interesting is something that I forgot about myself, Chris, when we talked earlier this afternoon. Do either one of you remember a documentary in a book called Mirage Man?
I've heard of it.
Toby, do you remember it?
I know what you're talking about. I don't think I've ever seen it.
It was a book that was done in a documentary that was done that got attacked by the UFO community. Surprise. But guess who was in it? The majority,
Doty, right?
Not Lou Elizondo, but Doty was in it. But so was Hal Puthoff, Christopher Green, all the same people at that point. Guess what the theme of the documentary was? That we're hiding our U.S. technology behind the UFO cover story. That was what they talked about in 2013, right? So then all of a sudden, these guys come back later and come out and say, oh, trust us, bro. We really have alien technology and we really have alien bodies and all this other stuff. But back in 2013, they told a totally different story. And the documentary supported a lot of this stuff that's being seen and going on is actually a cover for our UFO or, for our technology used in the UFO cover story. But it goes even deeper. If you go back in history, you look at SDI. Did that or did not that not help bring down the Soviet Union? Because they couldn't financially compete with it. So you not only have it going on with the fact that the public's being lied to, but so's our adversaries, because they're running around trying to figure out what is real and what's not, and what kind of technology we do or don't have, and what its capabilities are. It's just like when they released the TikTok video. You don't think everybody in every other country was looking at that to see what it really was or wasn't, and what the United States had or didn't have? So this is a total deception and smoke and mirrors that our government always does. But again, just because they said in this article that they use some of the cover of UFOs, which they've done, and what we talked about earlier, Chris, the Symington incident. What happened with that? All this stuff's going on at the Phoenix Lights. The governor holds a press conference and he brings out a little green man and it kills it. It was gaining traction, but it killed it. So was that really, was it something from somewhere else, or was it our technology? Okay. Well, the Rendlesham Force incident, one more thing. 2 days after the event, they sent people from the base downtown to go to the people that were involved in UFOs. I think it was called Bufa, which is equivalent to MUFON, and told them everybody aliens landed at Bentwaters.
And we're going to talk about a little bit about that, because that really corresponds with the Wall Street Journal's idea, because you and I talked off air about what you honestly thought it was. And I thought that was absolutely. But I want to get to Toby. Toby, in this report, it actually specifies things that the government did. U.S. Air Force colonel takes doctored photos and puts them out at a bar or gives them to people to say, hey, look what we have discovered, knowing that this is an absolute false story. So now the U.S. government is actually going aggressively to put this disinformation out there and to really bolster a type of ufology theory about the whole thing. And it gets everybody into a tizzy.
Yeah, I mean, you can look as far back as Roswell and see the same thing. One day they're releasing a memo saying, RAAF captures flying saucer, and then the next day it's just a weather balloon. So for me, disinformation's always been part of this. And I do agree with what John's saying. It's a smart way to hide things that you don't want other countries or other people to know about, Well,
I mean, you could hide secret programs, but this went back to the 1950s, where they actually started this disinformation campaign and really fueled it to the point where, now you're saying to yourself, how much is really real? Or if it's real at all, is there really something else going on? Like John and I discussed, is there something catastrophic that may be coming that they want to put this type of information out? not only just to hide, secret black ops projects, but maybe something more serious is coming down the pike where they can blame it on, whatever they want to. So it's a shame that the government can't tell us the truth. Now, I know for a fact you can't always tell the people what our secret weaponry is and stuff like that, because you don't want the Chinese and the Russians to get to it. But just say we can't tell you rather than fuel a story like this. And John, one of the things we talked about is that right there at Rendlesham, right outside the gates, they were working on top secret black op projects, right?
Yeah, that they call the Rendlesham incident the British Roswell. Well, that area back outside the back gate with all the facilities that were back there was actually the British Area 51. And just to give the audience, which again, here's the problem I have with everything, right? And I know people don't have time to really do a lot of research all the time, but you got to know, that's why they're trying so hard to destroy history in the first place. You have to know the history of something before you can know what you're dealing with in the present.
Correct.
Right? Outside the back gate, right outside the back gate, there was Marconi was running a major operations at these different facilities, at Bowsey, Martlesham Heath, which was a joint American and British facility. And there were other facilities out there that haven't been declassified yet. They had actually developed the death ray there, which led to the development of radar, because most people don't know radar was originally developed down there, right outside the back gate.
Yep, okay? The British did it.
The British did it. And they were working on nuclear technology down there and everything else. And the interesting thing that was going on at the time during our event was they had just opened a new nuclear reactor called Sizewell that was just a few miles down the coast that gave that area an immense amounts of power that they could utilize for the different work and testing that they were doing. Okay. Now, the last thing that people don't probably know, and you see it argued all the time, SDI did not start when Reagan announced it. SDI was going on in the early 70s going forward. They were working on drones. They were working on lasers. They were working on satellites. They were working on all that technology right outside the back gate of Bentwaters, of Woodbridge, right? Now, fast forward to today. I just want to throw this in right now. We can even address it later some more. What's going on? All these drones are showing up everywhere in the United States. What's the first thing that comes out by the UFO world and a lot of the news? Is it aliens visiting us from somewhere else? And then why isn't the government telling us what it is?
Because they're fueling that.
No, but what did Trump just announce less than 7 days ago? There's been 5 major things announced in the last 7 days that have completely been snowed over. He announced the Golden Dome. The Golden Dome is a bigger SDI. And all that technology that they were working on with SDI starting back in the 70s is now advanced, 40 years. And it's just going to be a bigger thing, bigger than SDI. But what are we seeing in the sky right now? What's the first thing they come out with? Well, the aliens are here. They're flying around. Trust us. Is it really aliens? Or is it our own technology, once again, that they don't want the other side to know for sure what we do have, what we don't have, what our capabilities are, and we don't want the public to know what it is. And even though more people than ever believe there's life from somewhere else, as soon as the alien card gets played, they kind of lose interest really fast. And as far as 2017 went, it was a move forward to get the press to talk about it. But we're now in 2025. And what do we know more than we did now, other than there is a UFO program or UAP program? Congress is aware of it. But do we know anything more about it than we did in 2017?
Now, John, one of the things that you were absolutely correct on was this radar system. And we're going to talk a little bit more about it. But I wanted to put in there that when the British developed radar, it was actually a direct energy weapon. When they brought it to the United States to teach the Americans were working radar, and then they wanted to work on sonar. So when they put sonar into function in a lake, they were finding out that they were frying all the fish. I mean, they were killing everything in the lake, and they discovered, you're absolutely right, a direct energy weapon. So not only were they getting radar and sonar, but they, since before World War II ended, we had direct energy weapons. I mean, they were developing that stuff, very sophisticated. So when people say, "Oh, we reverse engineered," no, I don't think so. I think by some of this stuff, John, we fell into it by accident. Now, I'm not here to be a debunker, but I will tell you, we got some pretty smart scientists around that can, create some of this stuff. And the one thing that does bother me, and Toby, I want to ask you about this, is what about Roswell now? Is Roswell real? Did something really happen there? Or was that a misinformation thing? Or was it something like our equipment being tested and they didn't want to know about the crash, and so they said it was from out of this world?
Yeah, that's that's a good question, and it's a perfect, I feel like, example case for what we're talking about. You have once again this object crash. Days later, debris is brought into town. Army goes out there. They take everything back to Roswell. They do the press release that Walter Haut wrote about the flying disc being captured. Then the next day, oh, everybody, it was just a weather balloon. Let's hold your horses. So I'd like to be, I mean, obviously, living here, I'm still currently investigating Roswell. I've been to the crash
Sure.
site and the debris field numerous times. I spoke with people in town and people near Corona that were alive when this whole thing happened. And the one thing I've taken as a major takeaway was the people were threatened to be quiet, and they all felt that this wasn't something that was easily explainable. Now, to me, that's not enough to come out and say, okay, then it's definitely aliens. As we're talking about now, this country's been working on crazy technology for a lot longer than most people think.
Sure.
I
Look what
believe
they
in,
just put out. They just put out, science and technology director just said we can manipulate time and space. Well, if they just put that out now, they've been doing that for years, right, John?
Yeah, but let me expand on Roswell that Toby, could probably expand even further. What hasn't been reported for a reason, mostly, and was forgotten because the UFO story came out, was they had just activated 2 weeks before the first major radar system in the United States, right down there, right in the desert, right out by Roswell. It was a triangular radar system that they had to move because they were having issues on the East Coast with. Okay. Shortly after that, what happens? Something crashes there. Is it possible we were testing the radar systems? Or the Soviet Union was testing the radar systems? I could go back to another event that's been labeled UFOs, the 1942 incident on the Battle of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Okay. That was eventually attributed to the Japanese were launching balloons into our country. Well, what they didn't want people to know at the time was it was a biological war. They were putting on biological stuff on these balloons and crashing it into the United States to try to infect the population and make them sick. Well, they didn't really want to know that. And there was actually one of the first times in the history that the unit that cleaned it up and was cleaning this up and they covered it up was an Afro-American unit. They utilized that unit to do it. But they didn't want people to know that the Japanese were capable of doing that and what they were trying to do. So the Battle of Los Angeles was labeled a UFO incident. Okay. Was Roswell alien based? I don't know for sure. Toby would know better. But there are situations that were going on down there at the time that go forward in other events that have happened over the years that tie back to radar systems and everything else. And why would the government not want the other side or even the American people to totally know what is or isn't going on?
yeah,
Well,
and for anybody
go
that
ahead,
wants
Louis.
to, sorry, for anybody that wants to look into what John's talking about, they were called Fugo balloons, Fugo. It's a program I hadn't heard about until I was told recently, and it's fascinating. They did have these teams of just African American soldiers that would be sent in as soon as one of these things landed and didn't detonate if it was one of the ones with explosives on it. I also believe they tried floating over infected rats, right, John?
Yeah, they were. I forget. I didn't want to say for sure because I forget what they were trying to affect the population with, but it was biological in nature. Yes.
I
So-
believe some of these balloons were actually of a substance that would catch forest fires. They wanted to definitely destroy a lot of our forest fires, or put forests, destroy it. And so they were launching these balloons, but they kept them from the public. They didn't want the public to know that, the Japanese were easily bringing balloons over here, floating them over, and then exploding with biological weapons, as you're saying, and also incendiary devices that would do it. Now, here's something, John. I gotta ask you this. After all this time, and this comes out, what do you think of Rendlesham now? I mean, we've talked off air, but I think it's good that you talk about what you really believe the Rendlesham incident really was.
Well, before I go into it, I want to put a little thing that Toby and I have been working on. It's called a trilogy, and the first book that's out right now is called Signals from the Threshold, and it's the hidden rays for UAP technology. Now, the point about this, and when you talk about Rendlesham, is that we go into the fact that there is UAP technology. It exists. It's not man-made. It's UAP technology. There's been declassified reports admitting that UAPs exist. Okay, the government, the Congress has hold hearings over it. I just did an op-ed. People have been injured by UAPs. The problem with the UFO world is they're so locked into nuts and bolts, where there's a biological being coming from some planet, God knows how far away, traveling in a craft that we would have to travel in to get anywhere. And they don't want to accept, I call it nuts and bolts ufology. They don't want to accept there could be other intelligence out there and other things going on. They have nothing to do with nuts and bolts ufology that we've been fed. And that's one of the things Mirage Man talked about, and some of the people talked about, was the fact that what you've been conditioned for from starting from the War of the Worlds was, interesting enough, is that not what the Wall Street Journal mentioned? The War of the Worlds was when we first started getting conditioned for all of this, going forward with all the movies.
We saw the panic.
TV shows and everything else about UFOs, right? So the Rendlesham incident, I'm as guilty as some people that have had recent encounters. But somewhat it's disingenuous by what they've said, like Commander Faber and even Kevin Day, because they eventually got caught in what they weren't being truthful about, somewhat because of the reason why things are classified. But the fact is, when we went out there, what we encountered, we could not explain. We had no idea what we encountered and what it was. So when we walked out of there, two things happened. One, we couldn't explain it, and we were scared about what we were going to tell our bosses in the chain of command. And you didn't want to be talking about aliens or UFOs. It wasn't a good thing back then, for sure. Okay. And we couldn't explain it. Well, we got to get out of jail card free right away, because when we went in there, we got told to shut up. Don't say nothing. We'll handle it. We'll let you know if we need anything. Go on with your lives and your careers. I took that card and I ran with it, baby. And I stayed true to my word right up until the news of the world broke. And then they started chasing me, and they've been chasing me ever since. But the point being is that over the years, through my own work with people like James Warren, Toby Martinez, okay, some other people I can't name that have helped me, that are still in government or worked in government, that have pointed me in the right directions, okay, I've uncovered that Rendlesham and what was outside the back gate had a lot to do with UAP technology, which no one's ever been specific what exactly that is. We're trying to get as close as we can in these 3 books, what we've based it on in the studies and the work that we found, and what we still haven't reported yet. But the point being is that there is something else other than nuts and bolts ufology and craft coming from Zeta Reticuli. I love that. And there's other things that are going on. There's other intelligent things out there that are taking place. Military personnel and civilians have had encounters with this and have suffered injuries from it. And our government's not doing anything about it because it's all classified.
It is, but John, now that you've seen this stuff, what is your true feeling of what you encountered? Did you encounter something that's not of this world, or do you think it was man-made?
I think it was something from somewhere else, which is what Condyne said. UAPs are real. We encountered UAP radiation. There's an intelligence out there. It says that in the report, and that report's been overlooked by the UFO world mostly, just simply because it's not a nuts and bolts. We know we have a UFO in the hangar. And this is a guy I'm going to bring up now that I'm not a big fan of anymore. But Nick Pope had a statement once, two things that stand out to me. One, he said that Rendlesham ties to what UAPs are all about. I didn't say it exactly to quote right, but that's what he was inferring. And he also said, we may not have a UFO in a hangar, but we have government technology in a hangar that's been developed from UAP technology. So our equipment and our technology, some of it, if not a lot of it, especially in today's world with the exotic technology, is based off of UAP technology.
All right, Toby, I want to go to you first because this is really irritates me about this Wall Street Journal report, that the lack of full transparency, to fuel this more and more, they kept Congress out of this. They deliberately not tell Congress what was really going on. But if they did tell certain people in Congress, they fueled the fire even more. So was Congress left out of this, and all these congressional hearings were just a horse and pony show, a dog and pony show to make us believe that there's really something out there? Or was it something that even Congress wasn't read into?
Yeah, that's interesting. Having talked to different members of Congress and now currently being stonewalled by members of the Declassified Federal Secret Task Force in regards to John's case, I could totally see that they were read into it. And I'm of the opinion that it can be half one thing and half the other. It could be half of what was being fed were these deliberate.
But they had congressional hearings, Toby. They had congressional hearings where they're saying, well, hey, look at this. We got photos of this, and they got photos of that. And it's now believed there was nothing more than a dog and pony show to fool the American people. It was part of it.
Let me ask you this. They had these hearings. What evidence was presented at them?
Not a hell of a lot. That, it's this person says this or that person says that kind of a deal.
The first hearing was really good, I felt like. I know John thought it was good, too, when Grush and Graves and Fravor talked. But once again, it's a lot of claims without any evidence, and it's been more of the same ever since. So,
John, I want to give you the same question. Congressional hearings, dog and pony show, or were they read into this, or do you think they were even left out of the loop? You're muted, John.
And he disappeared.
I think
they took him again.
Lost John for a minute. We'll get him back. So, anyways, Toby, I'm very concerned that congressional people who do the budget for these projects and everything else are now being baffled and bamboozled into the parts where, this is a big egg on their face. Because, it's not cheap to bring all these people in. They bring in people like Grush. They bring in all these other people. We got John back. John, I want to pose the same question. Okay. Congressional hearings, dog and pony show?
I'll tell you exactly what I think now. And I didn't have enough proof to talk about it till today. But two things stand out to me. What Lou did in front of Congress that day with the picture. And I think he fell on the sword to support the Wall Street Journal article, even though he's saying he didn't now, that he doesn't support it. But by saying that he was fooled by the picture, that supports what the Wall Street Journal, they're hiding stuff. But the thing is, what I said all along, Toby knows I've talked about this to him before, was this group's mission was not to get disclosure out. They knew disclosure wasn't going to come out. They knew that this technology and whatever the government knew, the people behind the scenes that had the purse strings in the DOD, the intelligence agencies are never going to come clean on this. They just admitted that in the Wall Street Journal article by saying they use cover stories to hide our technology. That's one of the things that was missed. They've openly admitted that stuff that they don't want the public to know about, they use cover stories and lie about. What they did do with the Wall Street Journal, with the New York Times article and what they've done with these hearings is opens Congress's eyes. And what did the Aerial Report just remit? That they've held this stuff back from Congress. They've lied about it. They've used deception inside the military themselves. And Congress has really no idea what we do or don't have and where our technology is. And I go back to one more thing that supports the fact that we'll never get disclosure. Harry Reid, which they wave as a hero, funded Bigelow to study this. As soon as, and it came back to these DIRS papers that eventually McCain got, which is another story we could talk about in a little bit. But the bottom line is, what's the first thing he did when he got briefed on what Bigelow used the money for and what they were going to talk about? He wanted everything that was coming out to go into a special access program. That's not even just classified top secret. That's above top secret, right? So he didn't want any of the information. Well, it is. He didn't want any of that information to ever see the light of day. He wanted it to be kept in a special access program. So all these guys that worked inside government that know about this stuff know darn well that none of this is ever going to be made public. What they did done is open up the current Congress the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years to let them realize just how secret this is and how much is being kept from them. And even Congress still doesn't have the full picture, but they've got a better picture now than they did before.
Let me ask you this, John. Do you in the Wall Street Journal report, they talk about Sean Kirkpatrick. Now, everybody was going crazy about Sean Kirkpatrick before because he went in front of the Senate hearing and said, I have no evidence that extraterrestrials have visited us or we have extraterrestrial technology or there's no proof of aliens visiting us. And he was the man who was in charge of all the, exploration and stuff for this. He was doing all the investigations. And then suddenly he leaves. Some people say he was booted out. Some people say that he was there. But was he giving us a message? Was he trying to say, hey, guys, there's other things that I'm not going to lie? And he just said, I'm out of here?
It could be because that's what happened with Blue Book. If you remember, like I said, when we started with the guy that was running the program was running in a certain way. But the interesting thing about that, and it goes into the Wall Street Journal report again, is this. Toby saw the emails. He wrote about it in the Roswell Daily a piece. I was invited. They contacted me. Salas ran after them to get up there. I told you about that off air. Mm-hmm. I was invited. I had meetings with Gresh. I had meetings with a contractor that wasn't a normal aid for the particular, different groups. Like he was a contractor aid for the intelligence group for the Senate, which was headed by Rubio at the time. And he wanted me to go up and meet with them, which they're part of the Gang of Eight. And he wanted me to meet with Kirkpatrick and their group. Grish offered if I would come up there and do this, that they would take me to NORAD and give me a briefing, which they never clarified what it was. And then I would get to meet with Javi Loeb and see what's really going on in that program. Well, because I wouldn't go up there, which one of the reasons why was that, one, I couldn't bring my attorney with me because the whistleblower stuff that they claimed that you were protected by, you weren't. And I wanted an attorney there to protect me. But also the fact was that you get down to the nuts and bolts, an NDA, you can't talk about anything. So they can say whatever they want about you afterwards and whatever else the case is about, which is what they did to Salas. But then you can't really talk about what was said, what you were told about, or anything else that you were involved with the hearings. So I declined, which didn't sit well up there with them and stuff. So the bottom line is Robert Salas got snuck in to a meeting with Nancy Mace. He got a phone call and talked about what happened at Maelstrom. And he's not even a firsthand witness. And what I mean by that is he was underground. He didn't even see what went on above. All he did was he saw what happened to the equipment below. Okay. And the fact of the matter is, it goes back to even further. There was a radar system involved called the SAGE system that was directly on the base, and all the systems were tied in to the launch facilities. And what did they say? They generated this energy to shut down the system. Well, that is another big deal because they've openly admitted, which what I talked about Favor and Day being disingenuous about, and Day got busted because he said the radar system showed this, and this. Well, he had to finally admit that the radar systems can be manipulated by countermeasures. Okay. And Favor, I caught him into admitting the newest helmet that we had just developed that was being used on the F-35 was being utilized by that group. All these new sensors were being deployed and being utilized for the first time with the Nimitz tax group. They've been fitted with all that. The helmet was new. The radar systems were new. And they didn't want to talk about any of that. And somewhat reasonably why, because then you got to go into the systems themselves, which is a cover. So the bottom line is the radar systems can be manipulated by our technology or by by enemy technology. The sensors can be manipulated, but when you look at the UAP stuff, UAPs can do exactly what they described happening. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't UAP technology that was being tested on that group. And then they say that there's no way that they would test that group, which was unarmed, by the way. There was none of that stuff was armed. It was right off Catalina Island where all this technology is worked on and tested. Okay. And you have the fact that they've now openly admitted in this report, which is no one's talking about because of the fight with UFOs. They admitted they shut down some of our nuclear capability that day.
Exactly. And one of them, I think, was with Robert Salas. The way things were described, Salas is now, I think he's somewhere around 84 years old. He talks about that glowing reddish orbish oval object that was hovering and it sent a pulse out. And, it was talking about shutting down 10 missile silos, something like that. But now it's coming out, John, that we talked about, that may be in our technology testing it to see what we can do in case we had to do it with the Soviets. Am I right?
Well, yeah, but the SAGE system was actually utilized for other ways. You just have to go in and look at declassified documents. It was involved in other stuff, including it was connected to the over-the-horizon system. There was an over-the-horizon radar that was in Michigan that was tied into all these SAGE radars. And interesting enough, all these different northern tier bases that had UFO activity, which is now could be labeled UAP activity, because what Salas said, the people that witnessed it directly said, they described UAPs. They did not describe alien craft landing in the missile field or hovering above the missile field. They described UAPs, which is what they now call a lot of what we've had encountered with UAPs. So it was an energy field that shut it down. So why do they believe that some kind of alien technology could show up, shut down our systems, and then they could bring it back quickly with having it attacked by aliens technology, which we know nothing about supposedly, but then our own technology that we know we were supposedly testing on these systems, then they say, well, they came back up really quickly and our stuff would have fried it. Salas doesn't know that. He doesn't know what these generators and systems and what they were capable of doing. Not only that, he doesn't know the fact that if we were knowing we were testing it, we were prepared if it did get shut down to bring it up very quickly.
Well, think about this. And what you were talking about, and we talked off air about that, is this electromagnetic generator that will produce an electromagnetic pulse that actually can snake down the cables and create a disruption into the system. But if aliens really wanted to stop our nuclear thing, they would fry it just like that and be able to shut it off for good. But like you said, we were able to bring it right back up and where we didn't, miss a beat.
Well, that's the excuse the UFO world uses is that, well, they were just sending us a message. Well, I mean, did we get the message? No. We're a lot farther advanced in nuclear weapons today than we ever were back in 1967. And why, if they were so concerned in 1967 about our nukes, and where we've advanced to today. Now we have supersonic weapons, which use the plasma technology, by the way, to go supersonic.
Hypersonic.
The hypersonic, that's what I mean, hypersonic. That why didn't they just stop the whole nuclear program? You see what I mean? That they don't. This is just a big fight that the people inside these agencies that won it have created. And no one's looking at the fact that this week they just announced that they used UAP technology. The Israelis have used it, which is part of the Iron Dome. It's going to be part of the Golden Dome to bring down those 100 missiles. I said that when I saw the shoot downs taking place. They were using plasmas, lasers, and everything else. And everybody laughed at me. They just wrote an article a minute they do. Boeing now has a system that they can use plasmas to protect tanks, aircraft, and personnel. And guess what? Hal Puthoff worked on and the Bismo was part of that technology. Right. Now, magically enough, that was another article that came out by the Army. They claimed that it wasn't from somewhere else and it didn't work the way they thought it was going to work, but they still were supportive of To the Stars, which has pretty much been destroyed and disbanded. Why would you give them kudos about their work if what they gave you wasn't good stuff in the first place? You know, you see what I'm getting at? Exactly. So, and the last thing besides the fact the Golden Dome, the plasma technology, the stuff to bring it down is, okay, they've talked more about pulse weapons and the hypersonic weapons and everything else. And all of that goes back to what? UAP technology.
That's right. Remember James Goodall, and everybody kind of forgets what James Goodall has been saying for years. I haven't seen him lately, but years ago, James Goodall says, we have craft that can do Mach 14. I mean, you know, we have that. We have drones way back when. As a matter of fact, one of the most nefarious drone incidents was Project Northwood, where they wanted to start a war with Cuba. They were actually going to put up a drone 747 or some plane of that nature. I don't think it would have been the 707.
It would have been a military plane.
Yeah, right. And so they were going to have a drone with recording of people screaming that they were under attack and then blow it up. And that would give them their ability to invade Cuba. And Kennedy said, what are you, nuts?
Well, they were going to create the image of God over Cuba, too. They were going to use holograms to do that. That was part of the program.
Think about the technology, John, that they had years ago.
Yeah, but it goes deeper than that. Is what I'm trying to say. We are so much farther advanced. Remember the F-117? It was flying in the 70s, yet they didn't give it up till 1987. Okay, and they did that when something else crashed in the desert of California, and they had to give something up. Because whatever crashed in California, which, by the way, the guy that was the site manager, the crash manager, nobody knew this until he told me this directly, was Gordon Williams, who was the wing commander at Bentwaters. Gabriel assigned him that task. Now, Gordon Williams told me afterwards he got taken to sites that he heard existed and didn't know existed, and saw technology that he had heard existed but wasn't aware of was operational after he cleaned up the mess. And they gave up the F-117.
Okay, I want to get into your book now because we got a limited amount of time, but I want to talk about your book that you penned under the name T.R. Klain. I thought that was great. I didn't know because I had to ask you off air. I go, John, the author is T.R. Klain. You started laughing at me. You go, Chris, what's the closest thing to T.R. Klain? You know, it says Tom Clancy. And you and Toby wrote this amazing 60-page book. I thought it was awesome. Signals from the Threshold. Folks, you get a chance, you got to read this. This is great. It's really well done, and it's got information unbelievable. I wish years ago. Signals from the Threshold, the hidden race for UAP technology. And, John, you start off with it saying that UAP investigations didn't start with Roswell. It really started in World War II with the Foo Fighters. But we talked that, you know, that may not have been extraterrestrial. That may have actually been some kind of pulse weapon or something of that nature.
No, actually, UAPs first appeared with the Foo Fighters, which were plasmas. Okay.
Plasmas.
And that was being created and moved around by radars because the radar systems, both by Germany and Britain, stretched out, and the airplanes themselves had radar systems in it. And the plasmas would be moved around by radars. Okay, but the Germans had already developed a plasma weapon, a plasma cannon, and they were shooting it up at the aircraft, the Allied aircraft, to try to interfere with their electronics and their guidance systems and stuff like that.
It's an electromagnetic disruptor.
Yes. So the point being is that's when they were looking at it. Roswell again happened. The incident happened right after those radar systems went online. They're the most powerful radar systems in the world. Now, some people that have looked into it said, well, the radar systems brought down an alien craft. Okay, maybe it did. I don't know. Or maybe we were testing it with our own technology to see if it would pick up certain stuff, or if that was the infancy area of stealth in itself, using plasmas to use it as stealth. Because the F-117 was the first aircraft that used plasma to keep it hidden from radars, but it wasn't built in the craft itself. There was a generator system that was attached to the craft right before it departed. So because I know this, because I guarded it, I was involved with it, and they've actually talked about it recently, and they actually fooled people. They actually ran a full system about what they used what the COSAR aircraft, and they made it look like it disappeared in the hangars because they were trying to hide how the F-117 was stealth. So they played games on other people and other people that did maintenance on other aircraft with the F-117. And that was one of the things they cited in the Wall Street Journal article, that they didn't want people that they happened to see the F-117, that they wanted to believe it was alien and not our own technology, because they didn't want the Russians to know what we had and the missions they were flying. Now, fast forward to our event. Prior to 1980, there's a guy that wrote Project Gringolo, and I should have looked his name up. We had him on Phenomena Radio. He was involved with the British radar systems and partly the stealth stuff, and Gringolo was part of that. The F-117, the British government wasn't aware that they were firing it out of Machrihanish in Scotland. They brought it over, they were using it out of Machrihanish, and they were testing the British radar systems that were the best in the world at the time with the F-117, which, by the way, was being covered by Alien. If anybody saw it, it was Alien, because it was something that no one had ever seen flying before. That's right. What the guy said. I forget his name now. Said that completely changed the British. The British it was kept secret from the British on the new stealth technology, because the British always coded their airplanes, which made it harder to reflect off a radar. But they didn't know that the shape of the aircraft made a difference. And it wasn't just the shape of the aircraft, it was the EMP generator that was generating a plasma field, which kept it from being seen on radar.
All right, I want to continue on that, because I want to talk to you about Project Condon, that was in the UK decades ago and stuff. Now, one of the things you wrote in your book, and I'm going to read it because it's fascinating, is Project Condon theorized that electromagnetic fields could stimulate plasma formations and in turn alter human consciousness. So now you're saying these plasma formations, this electromagnetic field, can alter human consciousness. It was no longer about a flying craft. It was about a system, an interface between observer and observed. Can you explain?
Toby, do you want to take a shot at it? I've been running my mouth quite a bit today.
Oh, no, you're good. Go ahead, John.
Okay. What Condon said, and that's another backstory. The guy that wrote it was called Haddo. His last name was Haddo. I can't remember. What was his first name, Toby?
Ron Haddo.
Ron Haddo. He actually wrote a book later that was pulled. Toby has one of the few copies of it. But he was possibly the pilot that chased the UFOs in 1956. That there was an incident in 1956 over Bentwaters Lake and Heath. There was a UFO incident that took place. Now, here's the interesting thing about it, because we'll go into Condon then from there. In 56, the incident took place outside of Bentwaters and Lake Neath. A few months later, there was an incident at Kirkland Air Force Base, which is where the Department of Energy is and where they develop all these weapons and stuff, right? Fast forward to 1980, an incident took place at Coyote Canyon in the spring of 80. And then we had our incident in December of 80. Again, both times we had incidents at Bentwaters and Woodbridge. Stuff happened at Coyote over at Kirkland also, either before or after. It's pretty, I haven't been able to prove it yet, but I've pretty much narrowed it down because he was an RAF pilot at the time. He was involved in chasing whatever it was up there above the skies in 1956. He ended up leaving the RAF, get his engineering degree, and then working for Marconi Company. Marconi Company was the company that was right outside the back gate working on SDI at the time. He was given access to all the UFO stuff, and he wrote a lot of stuff about it and what he learned from. A lot of this stuff is still redacted, and I'm aware of. Maybe some of it's been redacted since. But the report came out because David Clark in the UK found out about a report that was briefly mentioned, and the British are more honest about releasing stuff. They redact most of it, but they at least are honest that there's something there. But he actually admitted in the report, which it was out in 2006, and I didn't find it until 2000. I think it was 11. I found it when I read the whole report, which all the main researchers in ufology had it and just basically ignored it. Why? Because it didn't fit the nuts and bolts philosophy that they believe in, that we have biological beings flying in craft that we could only fly in, coming from Zeta Reticuli or somewhere else out there that's light years, millions of light years away. So anyway, going into the fact that he put in there, we were exposed to UAP radiation, okay? That was part of what was presented in my case to get my settlement from the VA, which they acknowledged that me and another guy were injured in the line of duty during that event. And part of the evidence submitted was we were exposed to UAP radiation.
Well, the other thing I want to say that's in your book, and I need you to explain this because it's an amazing statement. You talk about radar, and we talked a lot about radar tonight, but you said that radar just doesn't detect, it provokes. What do you mean by that, guys? You put it in your book.
Toby?
I want to jump in with something else real quick. We did update the name and title of the book to Rendlesham, Signals from the Threshold.
Okay.
And it's got John's name on it now. So T.R. Klein is officially retired from the business last time I checked.
Well, the copy I got had T.R. Klein, but I want to get back to Toby, this radar, where you're saying it doesn't just detect, it provokes. What do you mean by that?
So are you talking about, John, is this like how we discussed how the EM fields that the radar
would be Project Blue
with?
Book.
Yeah, right.
So he's talking mainly about EM fields. And I think, to give an example, like John said, going back to 47 near Roswell, they're testing new types of radars that get off these different signals, different frequencies. They have a way of attracting things. Sort of like when you go fishing, you put a worm on the hook, when you drop it in the water, some fish are going to come, you pull it up and you put a different type of bait on, different fish are going to come to it.
Gotcha.
So I think basically these different, and you'll have to forgive me for being a little slow right now. I know I talked to you off the air earlier about.
Yeah, I understand.
That. But yeah, I think it's more of an attractant. Like we say in the book, that this is a language that they're speaking. We weren't ready to understand it. And through radar, we were able to.
It goes deeper
ahead,
than
John.
that. Okay. The plasma, there's man-made created plasmas, which the radars are capable of, including over the horizon, which, by the way, wasn't active at the time of Bentwaters, allegedly. But there's another backstory to that. They shut down the main facility, but they actually realized they could develop EMP weapons off of the over the horizon radar, but they made it smaller. And I'll give you an example by what I mean. In the old days, the elephant cages at these bases, and Chicksen had one at the time. We were involved, and it was one of the few bases that didn't have an airfield. They now just use small radar dishes to do the same thing that these Alpha cages did. Okay, so they were able to make the over-the-horizon radar smaller to use the EMP weapons. Sage radar can create plasma balls, but they also can provoke these fields. Now the difference is Rendlesham has real UAPs there. They have real plasmas and an energy field that creates them and comes out of them, which is tied to the ley lines and the energy field of the Earth itself. And there are other places that have those fields, and they have put military equipment in those locations to study it and utilize it. One of the places is down in Catalina Island. There's another place down in Florida where they develop all this stealth technology at. That's where both incidents happened with the aircraft carriers. Both of the aircraft carriers were testing new equipment before they deployed. They had been refitted, and they've been out of commission for a while, been refitted, and had these new sensors and new equipment. So these radars can create man-made plasmas that are also steered by the lasers. They were working on lasers. They were working on radars. They had the advanced radar systems right outside the back gate at Woodbridge. They had the Rendlesham Heath, which was a communications facility, and also had satellite dishes back there that also were working on drones and lasers, satellite communications. And a lot of people don't even think about this, but a lot of the stuff that you see it happen will be created from space coming back in, not from the ground going back out. We can create these effects by satellites, using the satellites and lasers and quantum technology that's now been advanced, and these new advanced EM generators.
John, let's talk about Echo Protocol, because you were directly involved with that. You know, Rendlesham triggered the launch of that internal investigation. They dubbed it Echo Protocol. Very few people have heard about that, but you talk about it in your book, and they talk about the interface with military hardware, influenced neurological states, exposed classified weapon sites to remote observation. And they all wanted to try to coordinate it with UAPs. And they wanted to see about cognitive testing of involved personnel, hence you, biometric scans of non-ionizing radiation exposure. Tell us about ECHO.
Well, it goes back to John Alexander, which most people don't know. He always poo-pooed UFOs, which the UFO world wouldn't take him serious. But he was working on a lot of this technology. So was Kit Green. So is Hal Puthoff. So is Eric Davis. In fact, the backstory goes to the 38 DIRTS papers that you weren't even aware of today. They had money that, Toby, now I may be wrong about the DIRTS, so maybe you can get in there. Wasn't the DIRTS papers written from the funding that Reed gave Bigelow? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding, yeah.
Right. Okay. So what happened was that was what Reed wanted to put in the classified SAP program. They studied all this, which was UAP technology, which was funded by the government, which then went to Bigelow Aerospace, which they wrote all these papers that were classified. I'd seen some of those papers when I went down and met with Puthoff that I weren't aware were classified, but I guess they were, the way they claim they released them now. But it goes into all this different things about biological effects, psychological effects, all these different things that UAPs can do, what the weaponry systems can be doing. One of those papers was introduced as evidence to Congress during the Grish hearing by Puthoff. Okay.
Right.
But the backstory to this is I saw those papers before they went to McCain. But guess who got my settlement from the government because of what happened at Rendlesham and the papers that were given to them, some of them that were classified.
Right.
Some of the stuff that Williams gave over to McCain and that McCain was involved with and the committee was involved with, they went to McCain after I got my settlement because he was read into all this stuff and what was going on.
Now, in your book, you state that Hal Puthoff explains that UAPs may not even be a craft. They may be a coherent energy structure capable of altering space, time, and perception. not a craft?
No, it's a time dilation bubble. But
All right,
we
explain
can
that.
utilize. Well, okay, it's a simple thing. Go to Star Trek. They show the cloaking, right?
Right.
Well, what you do is you generate the shield, which they've just admitted they're capable of doing. Boeing's either got it operational or they're about to put it operational. They create a plasma shield, and it alters the time space that you're in. Okay, it's like the paper that was submitted to Congress as evidence that Gresh testified at. It creates a bubble around the craft, which allows it to fly faster using a different type of drive. And it creates, it completely eliminates the interference that you would have going forward, and it protects the object that's going forward. Hence, the new missile systems that they're developed that can fly, what is it, hypersonic.
Well, I mean, even Dr. Bernard Hirsch has explained the idea that UAPs were not simply atmospheric anomalies, but intelligent guided energy structures. They keep saying this thing about energy structures now. I guess that's the flavor of the month. And they couldn't answer certain things, but they kind of alluded that the craft was to interface with what, the driver, or interface with people, and then sightings to a response. It would actually respond to whatever, to be able to bring it in, send it away, or whatever, and then from an object to actually signal it. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, you would have to have. Here's the kicker to this. That's why it's taken as long as it is to actually make it work. Okay, you have to have the computing system to control it. And one of the problems they were having with the tanks was the bubble was creating effects, and people around it would affect them. But when they would move it, it wouldn't end up where it was supposed to, because the computing system couldn't keep up with it. Okay, so it would distort space and time. And when it came back and dissipated the bubble, it wouldn't be where it was supposed to be, because the computing system couldn't control it and keep up with the distortion of time and space. Which, by the way, you opened the show with that the science director just admitted we could do that, right?
Sure.
So the thing is then to go into space, you still have to have the energy source to drive it faster. You can't use rockets to even though you'd have a plasma bubble around it, it would change it somewhat. They still have to have a more advanced system to drive it to go to that speed to travel, unless you use a wormhole, which then the bubble would protect it. You would create the wormhole with the time dilation bubble and go forward. Now, one of the things that's interesting, which no one wants to talk about because Rendlesham's been discredited, is when Halt looked at it through the starscope, he saw things dripping down and like an eye winking at him. That's the beginning of an opening of a wormhole. Okay. And the interesting thing about that is, at that point, they were discovering, which is what they talked about, they discovered different technology moving forward off of old technology. So, or they were working on one technology and developed something else. These systems started creating wormholes. They started provoking the phenomenon. A guy by the name of Andrew Pike wrote a book about this, and it got pulled just like Haddo's book did. He talked about how UAPs got wrapped into the nuts and bolts UFOs. UAP and UAP technology is different and is probably some other kind of intelligent life form, but it's not the nuts and bolts UFO stuff that we've been fed starting with the War of the Worlds.
Would you consider that interdimensional then?
Yes, you can interdimensional travel. And actually, when you create this bubble, it creates its own dimension.
My last question for you before we wrap up this show, the Nimitz encounter. You talk about that in the book. Now, before you start, I wanted to just say that I was a believer that the Tic Tacs were extraterrestrial. And after talking to people who have more knowledge than I do, I'm now kind of convinced that's our technology. The same thing that they did in other places, that they were using it to see what they can do with it and what they can't do. Toby, I want to start with you. the Tic Tacs from the Nimitz?
Sorry. Yeah, I know further back, John and I had discussed how we have different types of technologies we believe where they can use lasers and plasma to create, I don't know if they'd say solid objects, but basically objects to be seen
Illusion?
by pilots. Yeah,
Would
but
you
they can
say I called it
also
an illusion?
more
Called
of a
countermeasures. Toby's trying to find the word countermeasures.
countermeasures. Yeah,
Okay.
sort of like how there's radar spoofing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, what if you had a visual counterpart to that?
Well, just like John said earlier, they had the technology to bring, God to the, in the sky with Cuba. Why not use that countermeasure as to do a hologram? Am I right, John?
Yeah, but here's an interesting concept of this. I did interview Kevin Day, and we got into it during the interview on Phenomena Radio. And his point was this. Number one, they don't do that. Number two, later he got caught where they can manipulate radar systems and stuff. They have countermeasures that do that. But his point was, if those airplanes would have been hot, armed, they could have fired a missile at it. And he said, here's what the missile would have done. It would have went at that object. It wouldn't have been able to, and they're not really supposed to fire them unless they can lock on them anyway, which, by the way, if you go back to the further part, they never could lock in on this stuff. Okay. They never could lock in on it, even with our sensors. And the pilots in the second incident said it was a fleet of drones, which the UFO world wanted to completely ignore. Okay. But the point is, he said it would, if they fired the missile, what would the missile do? It would go out, it wouldn't hit the target, it would turn around and do what? Come back and blow up the aircraft that fired it.
Right.
So isn't that amazing? If you launch missiles from a ship, if you launch missiles from a tank or whatever, or even an airplane, if whatever they fired couldn't lock in on it, it's a heat-sinking type of a missile or round or whatever, it would turn around and go back and destroy what fired it. Now, is that not a weapon in itself?
Sure.
But again, that is using UAP technology, which again, the UFO world does not want to mostly even acknowledge exists.
The one question about Fravor and everything else, and you talked about this briefly, and it is a deeper question. Can UAPs, you think, believe that they're interfacing with pilots' consciousness?
Toby?
Toby, you're muted.
Sorry, I pulled a John there. Can you repeat the last part of the question?
Do you think UAPs were interfacing with pilots' consciousness? It's almost like a dreamlike quality.
Yeah, I think it's a very high probability. And I think as we've explored the consciousness areas where a lot of these technologies are headed, as far as incorporating consciousness into different types of weapon systems, drones, some of the newer pilot helmets seem to have or working towards getting some of these capabilities. So yeah, I think based on different descriptions we've had from UAPs on the inside and just the research going into consciousness, I think there's definitely a way that those two could link together.
I could go further. Okay. Are you aware of what was called the God's helmet, Chris?
No, I've never heard of it.
It's a helmet that was developed by Green Putoff.
You got to remember, Marines only had a steel pot.
Yeah, well, it was a helmet. It's real. You can look it up. It was developed working with Kit Green, the CIA, Hal Putoff, and some of those guys, and a guy by the name of Persinger out of Canada. And what they did was they created this helmet, and another guy did, and I got to be careful how I say this. Chuck Tuccaro worked on something like this too. He did a special assignments report for CNN, the old CNN before he left it, and how frequencies can manipulate the mind. And that's what Conine talks about, right?
Right.
So God's helmet was put on people. I think it was 8 or 9 out of 10 people that they put the helmet on and it influenced the mind. And everybody that had it on them, or 8 out of 9 or 9 out of 10, came back and said they saw God. That's why it was called the God's helmet. The F-30, the reason why I said it was important with what happened at the Nimitz incident, the helmet that they were first, that you were utilizing and was just being utilized and was in operation during that incident was the first generation helmet that has to do with the F-35. And that actually the mind, it's a helmet that the mind can control, and the helmet can control more than the plane. They can have drones outside, they can have weapon systems off the plane and everything else. Now, you can counter reverse that, and you can actually, that can modulate and make you see something that you don't see. Not only the fact that they have aircraft that can take this EM pulse and stuff and satellites that they could use to create these effects on the pilots and the systems that they don't want to talk about. Hence, they go back and they talk about it's aliens. Everything that the new weapons that are coming online and everything, they wanted everybody to believe it's aliens because no one's going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Even the news today just gives brief reports. You don't see any science panels or any of these people coming out. Has 60 Minutes done much with this? They did a report with Bigelow where he admitted they're here and they exist, but he didn't clarify what he meant by that, other than, yeah, probably it's UAPs. It's an intelligent life that's here, that's existed on Earth forever. Okay? And no, they don't dig deep into this, and they definitely aren't going to touch the weapon systems and stuff unless the DoD wants it out there. And most of the time when they do that, it's either been completely exposed or they want this other side to believe we have something that we don't, or whatever.
Well, guys, I got to tell you, our producer generously gave us a hell of a lot of time to do this program. And folks, that's about it. As you can see, the Wall Street Journal put out this article. There's people who believe that it's all full of garbage, and other people say, yep, I told you so. But we had two experts on tonight that gave you their opinions of that article.
Stop, Chris, stop. I'm not an expert. I'm just a guy that has a lot of interest in this.
John, you're a very humble guy, but yeah. I'm going to say one of the most knowledgeable men I've ever met. How's that, John?
Absolutely.
Okay. And folks, part 2 is going to be coming out, and maybe we'll talk about that, as soon as it gets out and digested. But for tonight, I want to thank Toby and John for being with us, and let's see what happens. Good night, everybody.
All right.